There's always discussion about the value of the Swiss made label. Is it something we should care about? Is it something that should be tightened up? Does it make any difference anymore? There's often a lot of disparaging comparison made to the US, made in the USA. And I think some of that is grounded in reality, but I think there's also some really remarkable differences between Swiss made and made in the USA that are worth untangling. And it's probably worth asking ourselves, if we are fans of watches and if the idea of being a Swiss watch means anything to you, would you really even want something like the Made in the USA label? Let's get into this after the intro. Hi, I'm Pete McConville, and this is what I do. I overanalyze, overthink, and just geek out on watches, probably far too much. If that sounds like something you're interested in, keep watching, and if you like what I do, hit the whole like, subscribe YouTube thing. What I want to talk about today is the concept of Swiss made versus made in the USA. Two labels which ostensibly do the same thing, but which are actually really, really different. Let's get into the differences and just watch how this unfolds. Okay, so first off, there's some really big kind of conceptual differences between Swiss made and made in the USA. The first is that Swiss made is essentially outwards looking. It's not about talking to Swiss consumers. It's about talking to consumers around the world about what it means to be a Swiss watch. Whereas the Made in the USA is very, very inwards looking and is about talking to American consumers predominantly about where their watch comes from. A really interesting sort of distinction in how those labels are used and the limitations on them that illustrates that difference between outwards looking and inwards looking is that, for example, there's 60% requirements that are embedded within the Swiss made label for the overall watch and the movements are designed to align with Swiss free trade agreements with the EU and other international partners. So these outwards looking treaty agreements then roll back into how does something get defined as Swiss made. There's no equivalent for made in the USA. Made in the USA is not tied to any outwards expressions of what it means to be American, but instead is very closely tied to internal US government decisions on how they procure equipment, that sort of thing. So again, there's a great example of how right from the off the bat, these two labels, which predominantly seem to be saying similar things, are trying to satisfy completely different customers, completely different aims and objectives. The next big distinction between Swiss made and made in the USA is one is clearly coming from a small country, one is clearly coming from a big country. As a result of being a small country, a country that has half the population, or less, probably a third the population of California, Swiss made has a lot of carve outs for things which simply can't be done in Switzerland. There's lots of carve outs for natural resources, lots of carve outs for processes, lots of carve outs for things that just can't be done in Switzerland. So there's no point sort of requiring people to do something that's impossible. Over on the Made in the USA example, though, we're now talking a massive country, roughly the size of Western Europe, probably bigger than Western Europe, with a full panoply of all the natural resources, all the processing requirements. No reason why you can't do anything from the United States using the United States products. And so as a result, there's almost no carve outs. A classic would be, for example, gold. The value of the gold that goes into a Swiss watch case will almost certainly be excluded on the basis that there is no gold deposits in Switzerland. They has to be imported. Conversely, for something like a gold watch case, which has very little, really only one processing step between being just a lump of gold and being a watch case, that would almost certainly, to get a made in the USA label, that would almost certainly have to be gold mined in the USA. So this idea of big country versus small country, again, fundamentally changes how these made in Switzerland versus made in the USA ideas work. And the third huge difference is about what these labels are trying to achieve. The Swiss label, the Swiss made label, wasn't designed around saving Swiss jobs. It's not designed around saving Swiss manufacturing. In fact, these jobs, these monikers were kind of put in place despite, and they're constantly pressing up against the Swiss manufacturers who don't want these rules. The purpose of the rule is not to protect Swiss manufacturing or Swiss jobs. It's to protect the idea of Swissness, this character of what it means to be a Swiss product. It's actually the legislation that sits above the Swiss-made rules is the Swissness legislation. It's about character, not about work share. Conversely, the US, made in the USA, is 100% absolutely positively about jobs and money and having the jobs and the money stay in the USA. And it's as a result, there's some really interesting differences in what that means. The Swiss idea of requiring or wanting to maintain some sort of Swiss character means that the made in Switzerland rules, or the Swiss made rules, dive deep into the design of the watch. They require that the watch be designed in Switzerland. They require that all the original technical work be done in Switzerland. They require the prototyping to be done in Switzerland. They require all the quality control to be done in Switzerland. Conversely, if you look at made in the USA, it is absolutely silent on design. They do not care where the product was designed or who it was designed for. Thus, what they care about is that American jobs were maintained or created in the manufacturing process, but that is all. As a result, you can have the Made in USA label stuck on a Kia Sorento that was designed, developed, prototyped, QC'd, original development, everything done in Korea. Then you simply take all those files, bring them across to a factory in America, put them into CNC machines and robots in America, build that product, and congratulations, you're made in the USA. That idea is simply an anathema to the Swiss. That would be pointless. They don't understand why you would do that, because now you're not maintaining, for example, in that case, with the American system, there's nothing American about the Kia Sorento other than where the program ran that drove the robots to make the thing. And that's exactly what the Made in Swiss label is trying to avoid. I think they're actually heading towards the idea of they don't care where the robots are. What they care about is where the people were that did the design, that came up with the idea, that turned it into something. And that's why the rules kind of look the way they do. There is, of course, one last difference between the Made in the USA moniker and the Swiss-made rules. And that is that the Swiss-made rules are very specific for watches. There is a higher legislative instrument in place, but by and large, everyone just ignores that and dives directly down into the 60-odd page document that breaks up exactly what you're doing for watches. There is no equivalent for that over on the Made in the USA label usage. Everything goes to the very highest level. And I think that does lead to some confusion, because what we have is a very detailed idea of what this means for the Swiss, but we don't really know what it means for the Americans. It's often said that the American system requires virtually everything to be made in America, but the few examples they give, which are not watch examples, are confusing. So they give an example of a barbecue for the Americans, where they say a barbecue to be made in America has to be entirely made in America, except of course for, say, the knobs that operate the barbecue, except for the gas tubing that gets the gas from the bottle to the barbecue and to the burner. And there's a part of me that thinks, how is that not an essential part of the barbecue? And if they're prepared to exclude that from the idea of what's essential to a barbecue, what would they be prepared to exclude from a watch? And I think in a lot of our discussions about and a lot of the disparagement of the Swiss rules actually come about because the Swiss rules are quite clear. And because they're quite clear and explicit, and they tell you exactly what people are looking for, it's easy to find the loopholes. Whereas I suspect there are a lot of loopholes in the US, made in USA label, but we just don't know what they are. That'll get sorted out through some sort of case law. So, and until someone challenges it, and until they narrow, you've got a bunch of these cases which give you all of those sort of exemptions and carve-outs, you won't really know what the US law is for some time. So yeah, I suppose ultimately that's the difference. They're the differences in the made in, or the Swiss made versus made in USA label criteria and the logic and where they're coming from. And this brings me back to my initial question of, as a fan of watches from a certain country, say you really like German watches, or you really like Japanese watches, or you really like French watches, or Swiss watches, or American watches. What is it? Sorry, I just hit the microphone. What is it about those watches that's important to you? What is it about those regions that's important to you? Is it the design ethos? Is it the design flair? Is it something about the character of how the watch was created? Or is it, on the other hand, about the location of the manufacture? And if you could have one but not the other, what would you be more likely to want? Would you be more likely to want the idea that my watch design and its ethos and its character and its values kind of encapsulate something Swiss, even though the robots that made it were in China or Germany or France or England? Or would you like it the other way around? Would you be, is it really important to you that the people and that the machines making the thing are in that country, but you don't particularly care where the design comes from, what the character of the watch is, what the values are in how that's made up? Personally, if I have to choose between the Swiss made versus made in the USA ethos, one valuing kind of where the design comes from and not being so fussed about where it's made, versus one not caring where the design comes from, but caring deeply about where it's produced, I will go for the Swiss model every single time. What about you? Where do you fall on that? Love to know in the comments below. As I said before, I've been Pete McConville. This is what I do. We'll get into it in more detail in the comments below. See ya. Bye.